There is a photograph taken on the 11th of April, 1958. A woman in a dark dress is walking into a building in Los Angeles. She is one of the most photographed women in America, one of the most recognizable faces of the 20th century. A woman whose image has been printed on magazine covers and painted on the noses of fighter planes and projected onto cinema screens across the world for 20 years. She is walking into a coroner's inquest. Her name is Lana Turner. And the cameras assembled outside the building, the 100 journalists who have been given credentials, the photographers who have staked out positions since before dawn, are capturing every detail of her entrance. The dark dress, the carefully arranged golden hair, the specific, practiced composure of a woman who has been performing composure since she was 16 years old, and who has, in the 5 days since the death of Johnny Stompanato, in her pink-carpeted Beverly Hills bedroom, been doing what she has always done when the world is watching. Performing what the photographs do not show, what the frame does not include, what the 100 journalists did not write about, and the cameras could not capture, is the person who is not there. The 14-year-old girl. Her name is Cheryl Crane. She is Lana Turner's only daughter, and she is not at the inquest because she is not permitted to attend, because she is a minor, because she is the person who, 5 nights ago, on Good Friday, the 4th of April, 1958, picked up an 8-inch kitchen knife and walked upstairs to her mother's bedroom and used it to stop the man who was threatening to slash Lana Turner's face, break her bones, and kill her daughter. Cheryl Crane saved her mother's life that night. The coroner's jury will take less than 30 minutes to confirm it. Justifiable homicide. She was protecting her mother. She was exonerated. And then in the specific, efficient, heartless way that Hollywood processes the stories that are no longer useful, the world moved on. Lana Turner's next film, Imitation of Life, was released in 1959. It became one of the most commercially successful films of her entire career. The scandal had not destroyed her. It had, in the particular, perverse mathematics of celebrity mythology, made her more fascinating, more real, more tragic, more compelling to an audience that had always loved her but now also pitied her and admired her survival. She was nominated for an Academy Award. She continued working. She got married twice more. And Cheryl Crane, the 14-year-old girl who had picked up the knife, who had protected her mother when her mother could not protect herself, who had been on the front page of every major newspaper in America for a week, was placed in a juvenile facility, then another facility, then a mental health institution in Connecticut. Then she attempted suicide, and then she attempted it again. And the world that had consumed every transcript of the inquest, that had printed Lana Turner's testimony word for word on newspaper front pages, that had declared the Stompanato case one of the most sensational scandals in Hollywood history, did not follow the daughter, did not ask what happened to her. Not for 30 years. I am Mary, and today this channel is going to tell the story that the inquest did not tell. Not the story of the man who died, not the story of the movie star who survived and thrived. The story of the 14-year-old girl who was exonerated and then forgotten. What her childhood actually looked like inside that glamorous house. What was done to her before Good Friday. What was done to her after. What she built in the decades of silence that followed. And what it finally cost her to tell the truth, 30 years later, in a book that the world had not known it needed to read. Her name is Cheryl Crane. She was famous at birth, and nobody told her story, until she told it herself. Before the knife, before Good Friday, before the inquest and the justifiable homicide ruling and the cameras outside the building, there was a childhood, and the childhood that Cheryl Crane lived inside one of Hollywood's most glamorous households, surrounded by nannies and stepfathers, and the specific, grinding loneliness of a child whose mother's primary relationship was with the camera, is the part of this story that explains everything that came after. That is coming, the mother and the mythology. To understand what happened to Cheryl Crane, you have to understand what shaped the woman who raised her. And to understand what shaped Lana Turner, you have to go back to a street corner in San Francisco in December 1930. Lana Turner was born Julia Jean Turner on the 8th of February, 1921, in Wallace, Idaho. a small silver mining town in the mountains of the Panhandle, the kind of place where the winters come hard and fast, and the families who live there understand. In the particular, bone-level way of people who work dangerous ground, that nothing is guaranteed. Her father, Virgil Turner, was a gambler, a bootlegger, a miner, a man of considerable charm and very little stability. The kind of man who appears in accounts of this era as both fascinating and exhausting, someone you could not quite rely on and could not quite leave alone. The Turner family struggled financially and relocated to San Francisco when Julia was 6 years old, after which her parents separated. And then, on a December night in 1930, her father won some money at a traveling craps game. He stuffed his winnings in his sock and headed home. He was later found bludgeoned to death on a street corner in San Francisco, with his left shoe and sock missing. His robbery and homicide were never solved. Julia Turner was 9 years old. After the separation, she had been placed in a foster home, where she was abused. Her father was then murdered. In the span of a single childhood, she had been abandoned by her father, abused in a foster placement, and then told that the father who had abandoned her was dead, killed for the money in his sock. The case unsolved. No justice, no closure, no explanation that made sense to a 9-year-old girl trying to understand what the world was. She later said of her father's death, "I know that my father's sweetness and gaiety, his warmth and his tragedy, have never been far from me." She carried him with her, and she carried the lesson his death taught, that the people you love disappear without warning and without reason, and that the only protection against that disappearance is the kind of beauty and talent and presence that makes the world unwilling to let you go. Cheryl Crane, Lana's daughter, would spend much of her childhood raised by governesses and her grandmother. It was a full year before she and her mother were ever alone together. A full year. The baby that Lana Turner had desperately wanted, the child she had managed to carry to term, despite her Rh-negative blood and the doctors who warned her against it, the child she remarried, Steve Crane, specifically to give a legitimate name, was handed to governesses for a full year before mother and daughter spent a single night alone together. This is not a judgment about Lana Turner. It is a description of the machinery she was inside. MGM owned its stars in the specific, comprehensive way that the studio system operated. Their image was a studio asset. Their availability was managed by the studio. The roles they played, the men they were photographed with, the carefully constructed public persona that the studio press department maintained, all of it was subject to studio control. And the studio had decided, years before Cheryl was born, exactly what Lana Turner was for. She was the sweater girl. She was glamorous. She was the woman whose image appeared on the noses of fighter planes. She was not, in the studio's construction of her, a mother. So Turner, too preoccupied with her flourishing career, put her daughter in the care of nannies and sent her to private school. In a 1988 interview with People, Crane stated that when she would reach out to kiss or hug her mother, she was rebuffed. Turner's response was, "Sweetheart, the hair, and the lipstick. Sweetheart, the hair, the lipstick." Cheryl Crane grew up learning that physical affection was something that happened after the cameras had finished. That touch was scheduled around the performance. That her mother's body, the body that the studio maintained and the world admired, was not available to her in the uncomplicated way that children need their mothers' bodies to be available to them. Crane longed for Turner's attentiveness and confessed that she would often go into her mother's closet when Lana was gone to inhale her essence. She went into her mother's closet to smell her clothes, because the clothes were there when the mother was not, and the mother was not there very often. Meanwhile, the marriages continued. Artie Shaw, Joseph Stephen Crane, Cheryl's father, married twice, Henry J. Topping, Lex Barker, and onward. As Cheryl later wrote in her memoir, "Both of my parents were driven personalities, vain, gifted, selfish, and wild. I was enthralled by them, but I lived at a distance, their princess in a tower. A princess in a tower, famous at birth, pampered and alone, surrounded by a world of extraordinary glamour, MGM Studios and Hollywood parties and Clark Gable and Frank Sinatra and Howard Hughes appearing in and out of her mother's life and raised, fundamentally, by nannies and her grandmother, while the woman whose closet she crept into to smell her absence was somewhere else. Being what the camera required, Cheryl later said of her childhood, "It was wonderful, a bit lonely, but basically I enjoyed my life." A bit lonely. That phrase, delivered with the specific restraint of a woman who has spent a lifetime choosing her words carefully about the things that hurt the most, contains more than it appears to. A bit lonely is what you say when the full description would take too long and cost too much. In 1953, Lana Turner married for the fourth time. The man she married was tall and handsome and had played Tarzan in the movies. Cheryl was 10 years old. She was the flower girl at the wedding. And within months of that wedding, inside the beautiful Beverly Hills house, behind the locked doors of the bedrooms, in the hidden darkness that the studio press department had no mechanism for managing, something began that would not stop for 3 years. What Lex Barker did, how long it lasted, how Cheryl finally told someone, and what Lana Turner did when she found out, is coming. The Stepfather. In 1953, Lana Turner married Lex Barker. He was everything Hollywood required of a leading man in the specific, narrow aesthetic of 1950s cinema. Tall, broad-shouldered, square-jawed. He had come from a wealthy New York family, old money, social register, the kind of background that carried a legitimacy that Hollywood new money was still trying to manufacture. He had played Tarzan in 5 RKO films. He was in his 30s, handsome, and in the public performance of their courtship attentive to Lana in the way that men who understand the value of a famous woman's public approval are attentive. Cheryl was a flower girl at her mother's wedding to Lex. She was 10 years old, standing in a church in a flower girl's dress, watching her mother marry the 4th husband, the latest in the line of men who would arrive in the beautiful house and be called something approximating family, and then, in time, depart. She did not yet know what was coming. Starting when she was just 10.5 years old, Lex Barker began a cycle of horrific sexual abuse against Cheryl. She described being molested and violently raped by her stepfather for years. Barker first exposed himself to her in a sauna. Not long after that, he began coming into her room at night to sexually assault her. The abuse was so brutal that Crane needed stitches. At one point, she attempted to resist his attack, and he responded by nearly suffocating her. She was 10 years old when it began. She was in a house that was full of people, staff, nannies, Lana's assistants, the constant peripheral presence of Hollywood life. She was in a house that the press described as beautiful and glamorous, and filled with the specific, luminous energy of one of America's most famous women. And she was being harmed in that house, systematically, for 3 years, by the man her mother had married. Barker threatened her, telling her that if she told her mother, it would destroy Lana's career. The career, even in the threats made to a 10-year-old child, even in the specific language of the man who was abusing her, the career came first. The image came first. The machinery came first. Cheryl kept the secret because she was 10 years old, and she had been told that the consequence of not keeping it was that her mother's world would collapse. And whatever Lana Turner's limitations as a present and available mother had been whatever distance the hair and the lipstick had created. Whatever closet smelling had replaced the hugs, Cheryl loved her mother. With the specific, consuming, complicated love of a child who has been given less than she needed and has compensated by making what she received into something precious. She kept the secret. For 3 years, she attended St. Paul the Apostle School in Los Angeles. She went to class. She performed the normal activities of a Hollywood child. She attended her mother's film screenings. She sat in the beautiful houses. She breathed in the closets. And she kept the secret. Until 1957, when she was 13 years old and could no longer keep it. Afraid to tell her mother directly, Cheryl turned first to her grandmother, Lana's own mother. Her grandmother told Lana the truth. The moment Lana Turner was told what Lex Barker had been doing to her daughter for 3 years. What happened next is documented in multiple accounts and described differently depending on the source. According to one account, Turner held a loaded gun to Barker's head as he slept, before deciding that his life was not worth her incarceration. She stood over the man who had harmed her daughter for 3 years with a loaded gun and decided not to pull the trigger. And then she divorced him, quietly, never revealing the reason behind the divorce. The official reason given was irreconcilable differences. The specific, bureaucratic language that Hollywood used, that Hollywood had always used to contain the things that the image could not accommodate. Barker moved to Europe and continued a successful career for decades without these allegations following him. He moved to a different continent and started over. No charges, no public accounting, no acknowledgement from anyone in a position of authority that what had happened to a child in a Beverly Hills house deserved a response beyond a quiet divorce and a press statement about irreconcilable differences. Cheryl was 13 years old. She had just told the truth about 3 years of abuse. And the response, the full, complete institutional response of Hollywood in 1957, was silence. Management. The careful maintenance of an image that could not include what had been done to a child inside it. And then, 8 months after Lex Barker was quietly removed from the house, Johnny Stompanato arrived. When Turner told Cheryl she had met a very nice gentleman who had a horse, Crane decided she liked him before she had even met him. Stompanato allowed her to ride his horse, gave her a part-time job at one of his companies, and acted as her confidant. He was kind to her. After 3 years of Lex Barker, a man who was kind to her felt like oxygen. She could not yet see what was happening behind her mother's closed bedroom door. Johnny Stompanato was not a man who hid his nature particularly carefully. He had followed Lana Turner to London. He had appeared on her film set with a gun. He had been physically disarmed by her co-star Sean Connery and deported from England. He had beaten Lana Turner on multiple documented occasions. And he had continued to be her boyfriend through all of it. The year between the first phone call and Good Friday, 1958, what Cheryl heard through the walls, what she knew and did not say, and the specific, documented night when a 14-year-old girl who had already survived 3 years of abuse by one man picked up a knife from the kitchen counter and decided she would not let another man destroy the only person she had left. Is coming. Good Friday. Johnny Stompanato was 32 years old in April 1958. He was a former United States Marine, a decorated veteran of the Pacific War, a man who had come home from combat and found that the skills it had given him the specific, physical confidence of someone who has been trained to dominate situations through force had a market in civilian Los Angeles that paid better than legitimate work. He became a bodyguard for Mickey Cohen. Mickey Cohen was the most prominent organized crime figure in Los Angeles in the 1950s, a man whose name appeared in newspapers the way that powerful men's names appear when the newspapers have decided that the power is worth covering, which is to say regularly, and with a kind of reluctant fascination. Cohen was flamboyant and violent and genuinely dangerous, and he was also, somehow, a celebrity, the specific, American kind of celebrity that attaches to men who are openly transgressive in ways the public finds compelling. Stompanato worked for Cohen. He was, in the particular hierarchy of the Los Angeles criminal world, a relatively minor figure, a bodyguard, a fixer, a man whose value came from his physical presence and his willingness to use it. But he was also handsome and charming, and persistent in the specific way of men who understand that a famous woman's proximity is its own kind of currency. He pursued Lana Turner. In 1957, Turner was filming Another Time, Another Place in London. Stompanato followed her there. He appeared on the film set with a pistol. He suspected Turner was having an affair with her co-star Sean Connery and confronted him. Connery knocked him unconscious with one punch. He then waited until Stompanato regained consciousness and told him that if he ever saw him again, he would kill him. Sean Connery. One punch. Stompanato was expelled from England, and he was still Lana Turner's boyfriend when she came back to Los Angeles. The relationship continued. The violence continued. The cycle that abusive relationships generate, the separation, the reconciliation, the escalation, the apology, the return, continued with mechanical, exhausting regularity. Cheryl was in the house through all of it. She heard the arguments through the walls. She saw her mother's face the mornings after. She understood, in the wordless, absorbed way, that children in violent households understand the things they cannot name, that the man downstairs was dangerous, and that her mother, the most famous woman she knew, the woman whose image was printed on the front pages of newspapers, the woman whose presence filled rooms and whose absence left a space that a closet full of her clothes could only partly fill, could not find the door out. In March 1958, Turner attended the Academy Awards to accept her Best Actress nomination for Peyton Place. She took Cheryl, not Stompanato, to the ceremony. She had been nominated for the finest performance of her career. She brought her daughter, and Stompanato, waiting at home, understanding the specific, public humiliation of being excluded from the event that his girlfriend had been nominated for, was furious. He assaulted Turner when she arrived home from the ceremony. Turner decided, in the days that followed, that it was over. Definitively, this time. She told Cheryl what she was planning. She warned her that the conversation would not go smoothly. At approximately 8 p.m. on the 4th of April, 1958, Good Friday, Stompanato arrived at Turner's rented home at 730 North Bedford Drive in Beverly Hills. The two began arguing in the bedroom. Stompanato threatened to kill Turner, her daughter, and her mother. He threatened to break her bones and slash her face with a straight razor. Cheryl was in the next room. She had been told to stay out of it. She heard the threats through the wall. She heard her mother's voice trying to stay calm, trying to manage the situation, trying to do what she had been doing for a year, which was find a way through the specific, escalating danger of a man who did not accept the word no. And then she heard the threats get specific. Slash her face, break her bones, kill her daughter. I picked the knife up off the floor, Cheryl wrote later in her memoir. The door flew open. Mother stood there, her hand on the knob. He was coming at her from behind, his arm raised to strike. I took a step forward and lifted the weapon. He ran on the blade. It went in. For 3 ghastly heartbeats, our bodies fused. He looked straight at me, unblinking. My God, Cheryl, what have you done? He fell. Turner initially thought her daughter had punched him. Then she saw the blood. Turner ran to the bathroom for a towel. I didn't know what to do, and then I put the towel there, and Mr. Stompanato was making dreadful sounds in his throat, gasping, terrible sounds. The doctor was called. The police were called. Jerry Giesler, Hollywood's most famous criminal defense attorney, the man known as the attorney to the stars, was already present by the time police arrived. Police Chief Anderson asked to see Turner. Her first words to him were, "Can I take the blame for this horrible thing?" She wanted to take the blame. Let that land for a moment. Lana Turner's first instinct, in the immediate aftermath of her daughter killing a man to protect her, was to offer to absorb the consequence herself. Whether that instinct came from genuine maternal love, from the specific, practiced Hollywood reflex of protecting the image at any cost, or from some combination of both, the people who were present that night have offered varying accounts. What is documented is what she said. "Can I take the blame?" The police declined. Cheryl confessed. She was taken to the Beverly Hills police station. She was 14 years old, and she had just ended a man's life with a kitchen knife, and her mother was in the other room, asking to take the blame. The coroner's inquest was held on April 11. Over 100 journalists attended. Cheryl did not appear. Her statement was read aloud. Lana Turner testified for 62 minutes. When Turner broke down during her testimony, clicking cameras recorded every emotion on her tear-stained face. As she left the stand, an unidentified man in the public gallery stood up and shouted, "Lies! Lies! All lies! This mother and daughter were both in love with Stompanato." He was escorted out. The jury deliberated for less than 30 minutes. Justifiable homicide. Exonerated. And then for the world, the story was over. For Cheryl, it was just beginning. The verdict came back in less than 30 minutes. The newspapers printed every word. And then the machinery of Hollywood, the machinery that had been running since Lana Turner was 16 years old, that had managed her image through 8 marriages and multiple scandals, and the specific, relentless work of maintaining a mythology activated again. Lana Turner's career was not destroyed. It was revived, and Cheryl Crane, the 14-year-old girl who had been exonerated, who had saved her mother's life, who had done the thing the institution was incapable of doing for itself, was placed in a juvenile facility, separated from both parents, and left to carry alone what the institution had produced. What the years after Good Friday actually looked like for Cheryl Crane is coming. What the institution did after. The world moved on from Good Friday 1,958 inches. The specific, complete way that public attention moves on from private devastation once the headlines have been exhausted. The inquest was over. The verdict was clear. The newspapers had printed the transcript. The public had consumed it with the particular, voyeuristic appetite that Hollywood scandals always generated, the hunger to know what happened inside the beautiful houses, what the glamorous people were actually doing behind the carefully managed image. Now they knew, and now they were done. Imitation of Life was released in 1959. For Turner, the scandal did not end her career. Imitation of Life became one of her most successful films. She continued working in film and television for years afterward. The irony of the film is almost too specific to have been accidental. Imitation of Life is the story of a woman who pursues professional success while her daughter suffers in the shadow of that pursuit. It is the story of a mother who gives everything to the performance and not enough to the child. It is, in other words, a story that bore a relationship to Lana Turner's actual life, that was close enough to be uncomfortable and distant enough to be profitable. She received extraordinary reviews. She did not win the Oscar. But she was there, back in the machinery, back in the light, back in the specific, sustaining world of Hollywood attention that had been the only world she had ever fully inhabited. And Cheryl. In March 1960, Cheryl was placed in the El Retiro School for Girls in Sylmar, Los Angeles, for psychiatric therapy. 6 weeks later, she and 2 other girls climbed a 10-foot wall and fled. They were eventually returned after she telephoned her father. 5 weeks later, she again fled with 2 other girls. They were taken into custody a few hours later near her grandmother's home. She escaped. Twice. Not the reckless, impulsive escape of a teenager acting out, though the institution she had been placed in would have described it that way, because institutions always describe escape as dysfunction, rather than as the entirely rational response of a person who has been placed somewhere that cannot hold what they are carrying. She climbed a 10-foot wall. She was a 15-year-old girl who had been sexually abused for 3 years by one man, who had then protected her mother from a second man, who had been exonerated at an inquest while her mother testified in front of cameras, and who had been placed in a juvenile facility while her mother went back to the film set. She climbed the wall twice. Worried she was still suffering from the trauma of Stompanato's death, Turner sent Cheryl to the Institute of Living in Hartford, Connecticut. She was sent to a mental health facility in another state, away from Los Angeles, away from her father, away from her grandmother, away from everything familiar, placed in an institution in Connecticut where she was supposed to process in the specific clinical language of 1960s psychiatry what she had experienced. At the mental health facility in Connecticut, she attempted suicide. She was a teenager. After returning to Los Angeles around the time she turned 18, she began abusing alcohol and prescription pills. She attempted suicide a second time. 2 attempts, both private, both unacknowledged in the public record of the Lana Turner story, both unknown to the audience that had bought tickets to Imitation of Life and called Lana Turner's survival a triumph. Now here is the honest, necessary thing this video must say about Lana Turner's role in what happened to her daughter. Lana Turner was not a monster. She was a woman who had lost her father to a murder when she was 9 years old, who had been placed in a foster home where she was abused, who had been found by Hollywood at 16 and immediately absorbed into a machinery that required performance above all else, and had never, in the 40 years she spent inside it, developed a mechanism for acknowledging the cost of the performance on the people who lived around it. She loved Cheryl. The accounts of people who knew both of them describe a mother-daughter relationship that was real and important and genuinely loving. Despite describing her mother as often aloof and indifferent, Cheryl still considered the relationship one of the most important in her life. Both things can be true. The love can be real, and the damage can also be real. The love that reaches out, instinctively, on the night of Good Friday and says to the police chief, "Can I take the blame for this horrible thing?" That love is not nothing. And the damage that placed a child in a house with Lex Barker and kept her there for 3 years, that managed his departure quietly, rather than reporting what he had done, that allowed the image to determine the response, when the response should have been determined by what was right, that damage is also real. She was shaped by the same machinery that consumed her daughter. The difference is that she was the star it was built around, and Cheryl was the child it had no framework for. Cheryl Crane did not disappear. The story that the world stopped telling in 1958, that stopped following her after the verdict, and moved on to Lana Turner's career resurgence, continued. And what it produced, in the decades after Good Friday, after the juvenile facilities and the mental health institution and the suicide attempts, is the part of this story that the world has never told in full. The life she built, the woman she became, the book she wrote, what it cost her to write it, and the specific, documented thing that happened between Cheryl and her mother in the years before Lana died, the thing that makes this story something other than pure tragedy, is coming. What she built? Cheryl Crane did not disappear. This is the part of the story that the 1,958 headlines did not follow, because there is no scandal in what Cheryl Crane eventually built. There is no sensation in it. There is only the specific, quiet, painstaking dignity of a person who has been through the worst and has found on the other side of all of it a life that is genuinely her own. She found renewed hope when she went to work as a hostess at her father's restaurant. In 1968, she met her future wife, model Jocelyn Leroy. They moved to Hawaii, where they built a career in real estate together. They later returned to California. She was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1998 and underwent a mastectomy and was treated with radiation and chemotherapy. She has since been in remission. She survived that too. And then in 1988, 30 years after Good Friday, she wrote the book, Detour. A Hollywood Story was published in 1988. In it, she recounted her alleged sexual abuse by Lex Barker, the killing of Johnny Stompanato, and her coming out as a lesbian to her parents as a teenager. The book became a New York Times bestseller. It was the first time she had spoken publicly about any of it. About Lex Barker. About what he had done for 3 years in the bedroom of a Beverly Hills house, while the world assumed that everything inside the beautiful house was as beautiful as the woman who lived in it. About the knife. About what it felt like to be the person who picked it up. About the 3 ghastly heartbeats when their bodies were fused. And he looked at her and said, "My God, Cheryl, what have you done?" A sentence that she had been carrying for 30 years without anywhere to put it. About the juvenile facility, about the 10-foot wall, about the mental health institution in Connecticut, about the suicide attempts that the public did not know had happened, about the alcohol, about the prescription pills, about the years of trying to find in substances the relief from pain that the world was not offering her any other way. She named all of it, and the book became a bestseller. Because the audience that had consumed the 1,958 headlines, that had read the front-page transcript of the inquest, that had bought tickets to Imitation of Life and watched Lana Turner perform Survival on screen, had never, in 30 years, been told what the girl at the center of the story had actually experienced. Now they knew, and there is a final detail that this video wants to place with the care it deserves. Writing the book and talking about its contents brought mother and daughter closer. The book that told the truth about everything Lana Turner had failed to protect her daughter from, the book that named Lex Barker and described the abuse, that documented the suicide attempts and the years of addiction, that examined honestly the specific, damaging ways in which the Hollywood machinery had consumed a child's safety in order to protect a star's image brought them closer. Because Lana Turner read it, and she did not run from it. She stayed. Turner later stated that she regarded Cheryl's partner, Jocelyn Leroy, as a second daughter. She called her daughter's wife a second daughter. The woman who had told a 10-year-old girl that she couldn't hug her because of the hair, because of the lipstick, the woman whose closet a child used to creep into to inhale the smell of her absence. That woman, in her final years, called Cheryl's wife a second daughter. The woman who had divorced Lex Barker quietly, rather than putting a name to what he had done, who had chosen the image over the accountability. The management over the justice, that woman spent the last decade of her life closer to her daughter than she had been for all the decades before it. Not because the damage was undone. Nothing undoes it. But because the truth finally out, finally in print, finally said with the full force of a woman who had spent 30 years carrying it, made a different kind of relationship possible. One based on what was real, rather than on the performance of what was supposed to be real. Lana Turner died on the 29th of June, 1995. Throat cancer. She was 74 years old. Cheryl Crane was with her. Let me tell you what this video has actually been about. It has been about a specific, documented pattern that ran through Hollywood in the 1940s and 1950s, and that this channel has examined before in different forms. The pattern of an institution that creates extraordinary surfaces, extraordinary beauty, extraordinary glamour, extraordinary myth, and has no mechanism for acknowledging what the surfaces are built on, what they cost, who pays. Lana Turner was one of Hollywood's greatest surfaces. The girl from Wallace, Idaho, the soda fountain discovery, the sweater girl, the 8 marriages, the Academy Award nomination, the survival of the scandal that everyone said would destroy her, that instead made her more famous. The extraordinary, implausible, genuine American story of a girl born to a murdered gambler in a mining town who became one of the most recognized women in the world. That story is real. This video does not diminish it. But inside that story, living inside the beautiful house, wearing the flower girl dress, going into the closet to smell the absence, was a child. Cheryl Crane, who was abused before she was old enough to understand what abuse was, by a man her mother had brought home and married, whose disclosure of that abuse was met with a quiet divorce and a press statement and no accountability, who then protected her mother from a second dangerous man, when the institution and the machinery and the adults around her had failed, again, to make her mother safe, who was exonerated and then forgotten, who attempted suicide twice while her mother's career was resurgent, who spent 30 years building a life before she was ready to tell the truth about what the childhood inside the mythology had actually contained. Who wrote the book? Who named the names? Who gave the world the story it had consumed in 1958 without ever providing the part about what it cost the girl? And who found, on the other side of all of it, something that the mythology never offered her? A life that belonged to her, not to the camera, not to the image, not to the specific, relentless machinery of Lana Turner's stardom that had consumed everything in its orbit, including the safety of the child at its center. A life that was Cheryl's, with a woman who loved her, in a house in Palm Springs, working in real estate, writing books, living. This video has one question for you before you go. The institutions that consumed Cheryl Crane's childhood, the Hollywood studio system, the specific, managed silence that surrounded what Lex Barker did, the inquest machinery that put 100 journalists in a room to hear every detail of the night her mother's life was threatened, while Cheryl herself was not permitted to attend those institutions, made a choice about whose story mattered. They chose Lana Turner's story. Because Lana Turner's story was profitable. Cheryl Crane's story was not profitable until 1988, when she made it profitable by writing it herself. In 30 years, not one journalist, not one studio representative, not one person with a platform or a press credential had gone looking for what the 14-year-old girl was doing after the verdict. Cheryl Crane waited 30 years. She wrote the book anyway. and the book became a bestseller. Because the truth, when someone is finally ready to tell it, when the person who lived it stops waiting for someone else to notice and simply puts it on the page, has a weight that the managed mythology cannot match. That is the lesson of Cheryl Crane's story. Not the knife, not the inquest, not Good Friday. The 30 years after, and the book at the end of them. Leave me your answer below. I read every single one. If this video said something about Hollywood, that the mythology has spent 67 years, not saying, please share it. Because the mythology remembers Lana Turner walking into that inquest building with her golden hair perfectly arranged and her composure intact. This video was about the girl who wasn't there. This is Mary of Shadows. Thank you for being here.